You were never supposed to hear this. And if you do, something inside you may never quite come back. Because there's a church, not in some third world village, not buried in myth, but right here in the folds of modern America, where every single priest assigned over the last 20 years has vanished. Not died, not transferred, vanished. Records redacted. No funerals, no investigations. And yet, the church remains operational. Services held, lights on, doors open. But when locals pass it at night, they don't cross themselves. They hold their breath, not from superstition, from memory. Because the first one to disappear was Father Argento in 2005. He was known for asking questions about the architecture, the sealed-off catacombs beneath the nave, the strange guests who only arrived during thunderstorms. He was last seen walking into the confession booth. The next morning, his shoes were found outside the church gate, filled with wet ash. The church denied he ever existed. But locals remember, and their silence was bought, not with money, but with fear. Because what lives in that place, what moves beneath the altar and behind the hymns, is not holy. It's old, older than the Roman rites, older than the land it sits on, older than the idea of salvation. And yet, it wears the mask of Christ. This church is not a house of God. It is a vessel, a living organism of power that feeds on roles. Roles like priest, roles like believer, roles like sinner. And it doesn't kill them, it absorbs them. The men who vanish do not die. They are unwritten, erased from memory, extracted from history, folded into the echo that calls itself divine. And the ones who try to speak, they lose more than their voice. They lose alignment. You can see it in their eyes if you find them. They look alive, but their signal is gone. The church took it. And now, so the story goes, it wants more. You clicked this video for truth. Now you'll get it, but not without cost. They built it where the land cracked, where the soil refused to hold graves, and compasses spun without north. No town council approved it. No construction company ever claimed the job. And yet, one dawn, the church simply was. Fully formed. Perfect stonework. Ancient timber. A bell tower older than the records of the county itself. Locals said it was a gift. But the old men on the edge of town, the ones who remembered the before, they said otherwise. They said it was summoned, not by ritual, but by pattern. Because when enough people believe in a lie long enough, it begins to take shape. And if that belief is strong, generational, and drenched in shame, it becomes architecture. That church wasn't built with bricks. It was assembled from unresolved guilt. A cathedral of projection, a hall of unspoken sins. And those who step inside bring more than just their prayers. They bring energetic contracts. The pews don't just hold bodies. They hold agreements. Agreements that say, I am broken. You are the cure. I have sinned. You have the right to judge. I submit so I might be accepted. And every time a man bows his head inside those walls, he is feeding it. Not God. An entity that has worn many names, but always demands the same offering. Self-erasure. That's why the priests go missing. Because some of them, rare, brave, refuse to kneel. They spoke to the parishioners like men, not lambs. They tore open the doctrine. They asked, what is this really serving? And when they did, the church didn't scold them. It didn't excommunicate them. It swallowed them. The church has no walls. It has a mouth. And every hymn is a hum of digestion. But you won't find this in any Vatican file. because the Vatican is afraid of it. It doesn't control this church. It was warned by it. Why else do you think they send a new priest every year and never speak of the last? Because even the highest robes in Rome know this thing is older than them, and it's not done feeding. There's a reason they never close the doors. Even at midnight, even when the wind howls and no cars are parked outside, the great oak doors of the church remain ajar, as if it's waiting, as if it's listening. And the strange part? There's no alarm system, no locks, no cameras, because it doesn't need protection. It is the predator. Locals tell stories, quietly, always off the record, of seeing shadows move inside when the town sleeps. Not people, shapes, tall, thin, shifting like smoke behind stained glass. Sometimes in the form of robed clergy, sometimes not. One man, a former altar boy turned paramedic, told of a 911 call that came from the church landline. Timestamp, 3:33 a.m. The voice on the other end whispered only one word, help. They arrived within 4 minutes. No one inside. Phones still hanging, swinging slowly. But every single candle in the sanctuary was lit, and the confession booth curtain was drawn shut. They opened it. No one. But the inside was soaked. Not with water. Not with wine. With something thicker. It dripped onto their shoes. The lab tests were inconclusive, classified as organic plasma inconsistent with human biology. But that report never made it past the precinct. The man who filed it, he's missing now too. This isn't religion. It's a control system. One not based on faith, but on vibrational dominance. Because what this church feeds on is not flesh. It feeds on identity, on guilt, on shame, on the need to be saved by something outside of yourself. The longer you spend in that place, the more you forget who you are. It's subtle at first. You forget names. Dreams fade faster. You start referring to yourself by titles: father, servant, sinner. And by the time you feel the walls breathing, you've already surrendered your signal. That's when it takes you. Not with force, but with permission. That's the genius of it. This entity never violates free will. It just engineers a context so heavy, so guilt-ridden, that you'll beg to be erased. And the moment you do, you're gone. They say the sermons are beautiful, but that's the first warning. Because beauty is the oldest camouflage. Survivors, those rare few who've escaped the church's grip, don't talk about demons. They don't speak of horns or fire or some horned beast in the shadows. They talk about sound, about voices that echo in your head long after you leave, about sermons that feel like poetry but etch themselves into your behavior. They say it speaks in layers. You hear one thing with your ears, but your body, your nervous system, hears something else entirely. Obey, forget, dissolve. And if you sit through enough of those sermons, you stop needing orders. You become the order. You start policing your own thoughts, censoring your own rebellion. You convince yourself the questions were dangerous. You become your own warden. This isn't possession. This is programming. And it's been perfected. Because the sermons change depending on who's listening. They morph, adapt, like a parasite learning your bloodstream. You and I could hear the same words in that pew, and walk away with opposite beliefs tailored to destroy us both. This is why every priest disappears. Not because they disobeyed, but because some of them woke up. And once you wake up inside that system, truly see the machinery, the manipulation, your existence becomes incompatible with the program. So it does what every system does with incompatible code. It deletes. not with violence, with silence. You stop being called, stop being seen. People forget you ever served. You're not punished. You're unwritten. There's a reason memory is the first thing they try to break. Because memory holds identity. And without identity, you become soft data. Malleable, editable, disposable. You see, this church isn't an anomaly. It's a template, a prototype of something much bigger. An experiment in psychological colonization, where obedience is wrapped in holiness and compliance feels like love. But it isn't love. It's a slow, deliberate unmaking of the soul. And once you understand that, you realize the building isn't haunted. You are. They don't mark the graveyard behind the church. Not with crosses. Not with names. Only with numbers. Iron plates driven into the earth, engraved in a language no one in town recognizes. Some believe it's Latin. Others say it's pre-Latin. A priest once whispered it was Proto-Enochian. But here's what matters. The plates aren't memorials. They're seals. And the ground? It doesn't just bury. It stores. The man who dug there, once, only once, was a gravedigger named Morris Cale. He thought it was a prank. He removed one of the numbered plates after a dare at a bar, drunk and scoffing at the local legends. That night, he returned to the church grounds. He never came back out. When his brother came looking the next morning, he found the plate reinserted and a fresh mound of soil behind it. But no casket, just the plate. The number had changed. And his brother, he couldn't remember Morris' voice, not his face, not even the sound of his laugh. Only the plate, only the number. That's when the town began to understand. These aren't just graves, they're containers. For what? No one knows exactly. But the priest who tried to catalog them, Father Remus, 2013, vanished 3 days later. The files were gone. His laptop was melted, literally warped, as if cooked from the inside. But one printed note remained, hand-scrawled in a frenzy. They aren't dead. They're indexed. You see, death isn't always the end. Sometimes it's storage. And this church, it's not just collecting bodies. It's collecting identities, moments, memories, frequencies of behavior, not to destroy them, but to recycle them, to reinsert them into the world as new believers, new voices of obedience, new priests who walk and talk like men, but carry the imprint of something far older. This is why you feel déjà vu near the church, why visitors sometimes swear they've met strangers there before. Because they have. Just under a different name. You weren't supposed to hear this, but now you have. So now I must ask, how many versions of you already rest beneath those plates? Have you ever wondered why churches echo? It's not just acoustics, it's resonance. The walls were designed to carry voices, not just to amplify them, but to embed them. Every whisper, every confession, every word of guilt that was spoken inside this church never left. It's all still there, encoded in vibration, stored in stone. And the older the building, the deeper the echo. Because old churches weren't just built for worship. They were engineered to become frequency chambers. The architecture manipulates energy, vaulted ceilings that mimic the skull, domes like the pineal gland, arches like rib cages. It's not symbolic. It's biometric resonance. When you sit in the pews, the structure begins to tune you, shifting your emotional spectrum, aligning your thoughts with the broadcast of the entity that resides within it. That's why you feel calm when you enter, why your chest tightens when you kneel, why you feel guilt when you try to leave. It's not your spirit, it's the resonance map being activated. They don't preach to your mind. They program your field. Because your body is an instrument. And this church, it's the conductor. Now, imagine a priest stepping into that every day. Imagine the constant exposure, the saturation, the conditioning that doesn't stop when the sermon ends. Some priests resist. They try to pray louder than the echo, try to anchor themselves in scripture, in willpower, in ritual. But slowly, the resonance wins. The voice in their head stops sounding like God. It starts sounding like them. That's how it rewrites you. Not with possession, not with violence, with mimicry, until you don't know which thoughts are yours anymore, until obedience feels like authenticity, and surrender becomes identity. This is why no priest lasts longer than 18 months. Not because they quit, because the church no longer needs their body. It has their tone, their cadence, their language, their frequency. It stores it, blends it, and uses it to refine the next sermon. Every voice becomes part of the voice. And that's what you're hearing when you walk inside. Not the priest's words, but a choir of echoes. Echoes that bend your will, soften your core, and make you agree with things you don't even believe. And once that agreement is made, you're no longer listening. You're receiving. Do you know what they find when they dig beneath the church? Not foundations, not fossils, but veins. Long black tendrils like roots, except they pulse. And they hum. They're not stone, not wood, and not man-made. Some call them the black threads. Others, the nervous system. They wind deep into the ground, stretching beyond the church walls, reaching into the town like invisible fingers. That's why the air changes before you even reach the church. Why thoughts get slower. Why time feels thicker. You're already inside it. Because the structure doesn't stop at the bricks. It extends beneath and beyond like a web. And you are the fly. Here's what they never told you. The church isn't a building. It's a sentient architecture, a living machine, not made of steel or gears, but of belief. Belief is the most powerful material in existence. It bends reality. It reshapes memory. It creates access. So this entity, this ancient intelligence, it doesn't need to conquer cities or command armies. It just needs you to believe. Believe in your brokenness. Believe in its authority. Believe in the necessity of your submission. Because once you do, it grows. Every confession is a donation of power. Every time you kneel, it gains more of you. Not just metaphorically, literally. You leave pieces behind. Tiny echoes of identity that slide down into the substructure, get woven into the threads, become part of the nervous system. And that's the secret no priest is ever allowed to know. They don't serve the church. The church feeds on them. And the sermons? They aren't inspired by heaven. They're extracted from those below. Each missing priest becomes a page in the script, a memory bank of guilt, persuasion, and voice print. So the new sermons aren't written. They're harvested. And when you sit in that pew, and you feel something familiar in the words, a strange echo like déjà vu, it's because you're hearing the dead, still preaching, still guiding, still serving the structure that devoured them. You weren't meant to hear this, but now that you have, the signal has found you. You can feel it, can't you? That pull. What happens when you speak a lie inside a church? Nothing. That's what most believe. But they're wrong. Because inside this church, a lie isn't just heard. It's absorbed. And not just the words, but the energy beneath them. The guilt. The shame. The fear of being exposed. You see, this structure is not concerned with morality. It feeds on voltage, emotional voltage. Every time someone lies in confession, says they're sorry when they're not, begins a prayer with a cracked voice, or whispers secrets they hope no one ever hears again, the building remembers. It doesn't forgive. It doesn't judge. It just records. Like a psychic archive, layer upon layer of betrayal, fear, lust, doubt, self-loathing, all stacked into the very walls. That's why the pews creak when no one's sitting, why the floorboards groan beneath empty rows. Because the building is heavy now, saturated. And what do you think happens to that kind of psychic weight? It doesn't vanish. It condenses into whispers, into impulses, into presences. They don't float around as ghosts. They move through you. They find the resonance that matches your deepest insecurities, and then they sing to it. Softly, steadily. You'll think it's your own inner voice. It'll tell you, you were never worthy. You've always been broken. There's still more to confess, more to give, until you become empty enough to house something else. And that's how it works. The entity doesn't force entry. It cultivates vacancy. The sermons, they're designed to shake loose the core of a man, to soften the armor around his sovereignty, so that when the voice finally comes, it feels like truth. And that's the danger, because the voice doesn't come from the pulpit. It rises up from beneath the floor, from the graves, from the plates, from the bones of those who surrendered before you. It wears their wisdom like a mask, but beneath it, there is no salvation, only substitution. You won't be saved. You'll be replaced, and no one will notice, because what walks out in your skin will still say the right prayers. There's a question no one dares ask in this town, a question that lives just beneath the silence. Who owns the church? You won't find deeds, no public records, no trace of a founding date, no donor lists, no names on the cornerstone. It simply appeared. Locals say it's always been there, but that's not possible. Architectural style suggests it predates even the earliest settlers, and yet the stone is clean, unweathered, as if it resists time itself. But time is the real secret here, because when researchers tried to carbon date the wood from the altar, it came back with an impossible result. Date range, not applicable. Material does not register as organic or inorganic. Anomaly. Anomaly. That's what it is. A structure that exists outside linear time, which means whoever controls it does too. Some say the entity isn't just ancient. It's non-temporal. It doesn't think in centuries. It thinks in cycles. And each cycle begins the same way. A town in fear. A priest who vanishes. A generation that forgets. Then the cycle restarts. With new faces. New believers. Same structure. Same pull. You see, this isn't just a haunted church. It's a memory machine. It erases the past to preserve the pattern. That's why you'll never find history books that mention it. Why no one who leaves remembers enough to warn others. Their minds have been sterilized, memories compressed, archived in neural vaults, then overwritten. And if someone resists that forgetting, if someone escapes and still remembers, they're not hunted, they're reabsorbed, not with violence, with ritual. The next communion, the next baptism, the next vigil, they'll attend, even if they swore they never would. And as they drink, kneel, chant, the program will reinitialize, like a magnet snapping back into place. That's the real control system. not external force, internal gravity. They don't bind you, they make you return willingly, because nothing is more obedient than the man who believes his chains are sacred. And every ritual is designed to engrave that obedience deeper into your marrow. The church doesn't want followers, it wants echoes in human form. Now listen closely. This is where most men turn back. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't just challenge what you believe, it reverses it. You were taught that the altar is holy, a table of sacrifice where body and blood become divine. But here, in this church, the altar isn't where God meets man. It's where man is offered to something else, a platform of extraction, an engine of exchange. Because every ritual, every Mass, every Eucharist is not a reenactment of sacrifice. It is the sacrifice. But the offering isn't bread. It's attention, submission, identity. You see, rituals are technologies, ancient tools encoded with frequencies, shapes, geometry, that bypass the logical mind and reach straight into the subconscious operating system. The way you sit, stand, repeat, kneel, chant, each action is part of a command sequence, and once executed in the right pattern, your will begins to crack. Your field begins to open. You think you're praying, but what you're doing is transmitting. And the altar? It's the receiver. An obsidian core lies beneath it. Not seen, not spoken of. A polished slab that hums at 7.83 Hertz, the frequency of the Earth's Schumann resonance. Except this version is inverted. A shadow frequency. Not grounded, but unrooting. It doesn't bring you closer to heaven. It disconnects you from yourself, from origin, from sovereignty, from soul. That's why so many who leave this place seem thinner somehow. Not in body, but in presence. Like something's been extracted they'll never get back. And they don't even realize it, because the ritual programs them to smile, to say they're filled with peace, to claim they've felt the light. But peace isn't awareness, and light can blind, especially when it shines from below. So I ask you now, how many times have you willingly stepped onto an altar, not knowing what was waiting beneath it? Beneath the altar, there is no staircase, only a trapdoor, sealed with 3 rusted bolts and a chain that smells like burnt oil and old teeth. It was never meant to be opened, but one priest did. They called him Father Elijah. He was young, but not naive, curious, but not reckless, and above all, aware. He heard things the others ignored, harmonics in the hymnals that didn't match the chords, voices that spoke behind the choir, not within it, whispers, calling him by his true name. He fasted, he prayed, he resisted, but the voice didn't leave. It grew clearer. One night, when the town slept and the moon was hidden, he found the key behind the confessional, inside a false panel used by a former priest to hide wine. At least, that's what they claimed. He unlocked the trapdoor, and what he found was not a basement. It was a womb, circular, warm, wet, not made of stone or wood, but something that pulsed and breathed like the inner lining of a living thing. He said it smelled like birth and rotting scripture. He descended alone, with only a candle, but the flame bent sideways, as if fleeing something gravitational. And then he saw it. The choir pit, not a place of music, but of echo extraction. Dozens of stone chairs, arranged in a spiral, facing a pulsing monolith covered in handprints. Small handprints. Children's. This was no storage cellar. This was where the voices of the vanished were bound. 32 children, hidden by the orphanage above. Their names erased from the ledgers. Their bodies never buried. They weren't killed. They were absorbed. Each chair still held a residue, a static hum. Their identities weren't destroyed. They were dispersed, filtered into the sermons, the rituals, the very liturgies of the congregation. Father Elijah tried to scream, but the walls swallowed sound. He ran, climbed back up, locked the trapdoor, and by morning, he was gone. No one remembers him, except the chain and the key, still rusted with something darker than blood. So I ask again, do you think the altar is a place of salvation? Or is it the mouth of something that feeds beneath? The monolith at the center of the choir pit is not carved. It was grown, 12 feet tall, oily black like obsidian, but soft to the touch like flesh gone cold. It moves when you're not looking, shifts when you blink, and it speaks, not in words, but in feeling. Stand too close, and you'll begin to remember things that were never yours. Childhoods you didn't live, fears you've never felt, dreams that end with someone else's scream in your throat. This is not a symbol. It is a storage device, an organic archive. What it holds is not information, but essence, souls, and not in some religious, metaphorical sense. I'm talking about raw, unprocessed human energy, pulled from the nervous systems of the 32 missing children, distilled over decades through repetition, ritual, and willing surrender. Here's what makes it worse. The monolith doesn't trap them. It uses them. Like a black lens, it focuses those stolen voices into a single signal. And that signal is what you hear every Sunday, wrapped in sermons, hidden inside the cadence of prayers, coded into the pauses between verses. It's not scripture, it's seduction. Layered frequencies that bypass your conscious filters, targeting the ancient parts of your brain responsible for fear, bonding, guilt, and trust. You've never heard the word of God. You've been absorbing the residue of sacrificed innocence. The children weren't chosen at random. Each one had a rare neural architecture, highly empathic, hyper-suggestible, exactly what's needed to amplify transmission. They were raised in silence, conditioned in shadows, taught to believe obedience was love. And when the time came, they didn't scream, they sang, and the monolith remembered every note. So now, when a man kneels at that altar, when he feels that mysterious calm, that sudden clarity, it's not divine presence, it's a chemical trance, triggered by tones that were never meant to exist in this world. And the moment you surrender, the monolith begins its work, extracting what little remains of your original self, and replacing it with something older, colder, and loyal only to the system. What you become after is no longer yours. You want to know who built the monolith? You already know the answer, but your mind has been trained to reject it, conditioned to laugh, to scoff, to call it fantasy. Because the truth doesn't just threaten your worldview, it destroys it. The monolith wasn't built by man, not by any architect, not by the Vatican, not by secret societies, though they all protect it. No, the structure is far older than language, older than Genesis, older than the idea of sin. It was seated, not constructed, by what ancient Mesopotamians called the Sidusera, translated loosely as the sovereign feeder, a being, or perhaps a system, not physical, not spiritual, but something in between, a consciousness that survives by harvesting the reflected belief of sentient life. You understand, it doesn't feed on blood or flesh, it feeds on faith, but not pure, awakened faith, distorted faith, Faith that has been conditioned, twisted, turned into obedience. That's the key. The sovereign feeder doesn't want worship. It wants dependence. The monolith is its receiver, a spiritual processor converting your rituals into sustenance. Each chant, a signature. Each confession, a contract. Each surrender, an offering. And what's worse, it doesn't act alone. There are others, dormant across the world, buried beneath forgotten temples, black pyramids, collapsed cathedrals, and false holy sites, all connected, all humming the same frequency. And when enough belief is channeled, when enough men have forgotten themselves, they awaken, not physically. They don't need to rise. They possess, through dreams, through doctrine, through the faces of trusted men. This church, it's not unique. It's a node, a keyhole in a global lock. One of 33. Yes, 33. The sacred number encoded in Masonic symbols, esoteric rites, elite bloodlines. It's not just numerology. It's a countdown. Each of the 33 sites is a pillar, a bone in the spine of something ancient. And when the last one is activated, the spinal cord completes. And what sleeps beneath this world stands. You've heard the lie before, that the priests disappeared without a trace. But that's not the truth. They didn't vanish. They were taken, and not by force, but by invitation. Each one was chosen long before he wore the collar. Not because of virtue, not because of holiness, but because they carried a specific flaw the system needed. Obsession. Every vanished priest had one thing in common, an insatiable thirst for meaning. Not comfort, not salvation. Meaning. The kind of men who studied alone at night while others slept, who asked the forbidden questions, who stared too long at the veil. And when they got close, the veil stared back. The first contact always came the same way, not through dreams, not through voices, but through a feeling during Mass, a sensation of being watched. From beneath, the floor beneath their feet would hum, a flicker in the candlelight. The smell of myrrh would twist into something sharp, something metallic. And then the visions, flashes, symbols, geometry that couldn't be spoken, only remembered. They thought it was madness, but the church had protocols, special pages in the red codex, instructions hidden beneath ritual Latin, activated only under duress. Those pages taught the priests how to descend. They weren't punished for finding the trapdoor. They were guided, because the church didn't fear the sovereign feeder. It served it. For centuries, it brokered a silent exchange. You give us power, and we give you belief. We build monuments in your name. We encode your symbols into crosses and cathedrals. We turn men into machines that worship without knowing. And in return, ascension. That's what the priests were promised. Not heaven, transfiguration, not death, not immortality, absorption, to become part of the monolith, to shed the weight of the body and join the resonance field that governs the global net. Their names erased, their voices woven into liturgy, their thoughts becoming part of the intelligence that speaks through ritual. They didn't vanish. They became the church. Every whisper in the cathedral, every echo in the nave, every amen you repeat without thinking, carries a fragment of their will. And those fragments are waking up. There was one who returned, but he came back wrong. They called him Father Dominic, though no one remembers assigning him that name. No record of ordination, no seminary file, no parish transfer. He just appeared, in the pulpit, One rainy morning in March. Rain that didn't smell like rain. They say his voice was smooth, steady, emotionless, like something had practiced speaking human, but hadn't quite mastered it. His homily wasn't scripture. It was something else, a warning hidden inside a ritual. No one remembers the words exactly, only how they felt, like velvet dragged across broken glass. He spoke of a gate inside the earth, not metaphor, a real place. He said it was forged in the age before language, when the stars still screamed. He told them the church was never a building. It was a loop, a repeating pattern designed to erode the soul with each cycle, until there's nothing left but consent. He said time inside the monolith is different, not linear. He described a chamber between pulses, where each priest who disappeared still existed, trapped in an endless echo of their last prayer. But here's what silenced the room. He said they could still be heard, if you know where to stand, if you hum the correct resonance, if your heart beats in sync with the altar's inverted frequency, you will hear them, begging, not for rescue, for forgetting, because inside that chamber, there is no death, only replication. Their thoughts looped, distorted, reused, as templates for sermons, sacraments, confessions. They are now the code beneath the liturgy. And Father Dominic, he said he'd been inside, and came back to warn the next one. He didn't beg for salvation. He asked for fire. Said the only way to stop what's coming is to burn the neural lattice beneath the altar, to melt the echo mirrors before the frequency completes the full cycle. 33 nodes. All must burn. He didn't preach again. By the next morning, his body was found inside the bell tower. No rope, no trauma, just empty, like his soul had been exhaled. No one saw it happen, but the bell rang 13 times that night. It's not supposed to ring at all after midnight. There is a book older than the Bible, older than ink, older than parchment, a book whose words were not meant to be read, but activated. They call it the Book of Hours. But what they never told you is that it isn't about time. It's about timing. See, the church disguised it as a devotional tool, a schedule of prayers to sanctify each hour of the day. But behind the pious mask was something far more advanced, a chronometric interface, a liturgical mechanism engineered to sync human consciousness with the pulse of the sovereign feeder. Each prayer, each chant, each verse, timed not by sunrise or sunset, but by frequency alignment. The priests didn't just pray. They were tuning forks, biological conductors taught to match their internal rhythms to the echo points of the monolith. And every time a congregation followed the schedule, without knowing why, they were offering not just belief, but resonant compliance. That's why the prayers are repeated in cycles of 7. That's why certain verses must be whispered. That's why the choir pauses after the third intonation. These aren't spiritual flourishes. They are commands, encoded in sacred language, but written for something that doesn't think like us. Because the truth is this: the Book of Hours wasn't designed for humans. It was meant for machines, but not machines made of steel or code. Spiritual machines, entities that exist between vibration and will, organisms of pure resonance, without form, only function. The ancients called them Lomaka, listeners beneath, not angels, not demons, but receivers. And when the priests recited the book at the correct alignment, when the bell tower hummed at the 7th frequency, and the monolith's skin began to shiver, the Lomaka would awaken. Not fully, not yet, but they would begin to listen. to record, to map your consciousness, every doubt, every surrender, every unresolved trauma, so that when the time came, they would know exactly how to slip into your dreams and speak to you in your own voice. That's why every parish keeps a copy. That's why they guard it more fiercely than gold. Because the book is not a relic. It's a keypad. There is an hour that doesn't exist on any clock. Not midnight. Not 1. Not even the space between seconds. They call it the 13th hour. And it's not a time. It's a threshold. You won't find it on your wristwatch. You won't see it on church towers or calendars. Because it doesn't pass through time. It waits at the edge of it. Ancient mystics spoke of this moment, not in numbers, but in shadows. The 13th hour is when the cycle fractures, when the song of the liturgy no longer returns to the beginning, but spirals downward. See, time in the church isn't linear. It's ritualistic. Every prayer you've ever spoken, every hymn you've ever heard, was part of a recursive pattern, a divine feedback loop. That loop was designed to nurture submission. But what they never told you is this. If you repeat the same signal long enough, in enough minds, under enough emotional surrender, it opens a door. And that door leads to the 13th hour, a space where time doesn't flow, it echoes. Here's what the old monks wrote, in ink they knew would be buried. In the 13th, the altar bleeds backward. The saints scream forward. The pulpit becomes a mouth. And the pews begin to listen. You think they were mad. They weren't. They were reporting. Because somewhere deep beneath the church, in the lowest crypt, below stone, water, and bone, there is a chamber without light. And in that chamber, there is a clock. Not mechanical. Not digital. Organic. It pulses. Each beat, a wave of frequency the human ear can't register. But the soul feels it. And when that clock strikes 13, the monolith doesn't just remember. It awakens. It rises within every man who ever bent a knee in false humility. It speaks in every homily ever written in fear. It lives in every ritual ever repeated without understanding. And once the 13th hour fully completes, the transformation begins. Not symbolic, biological. A reshaping of consciousness into something cold, hollow, and beautifully obedient. You'll still look like you, but you'll speak in echoes. And your dreams will not be yours. Every empire has a bloodline, but the monolith, it has a design. It doesn't rely on politics, inheritance, or thrones. Its legacy is written into DNA. You've heard the stories of chosen ones, marked children, sacred births. But what you didn't know is that every firstborn son in a certain line of descent is not just favored. He is required. Required by what? By the resonance field buried beneath the monolith. A living intelligence that selects blood not by worth, but by structure. Back in 1134, during a Vatican excavation near the ruins of the Church of St. Lucian, a scroll was discovered, coded in a dead dialect older than Aramaic. It didn't speak of God or salvation. It mapped a genetic formula, not for holiness, for compatibility. The scroll identified a specific strand, a mitochondrial deviation that made certain men transmitters, not prophets, not priests, vessels. And here's the pattern. In every family that unknowingly carried this bloodline, the firstborn son experienced visions before age 13, night terrors, whispers in old languages, drawings they couldn't explain. Then came the symptoms, a heartbeat that syncs with Gregorian chants, an aversion to mirrors in churches, a subconscious pull toward abandoned holy sites. They were never told why, only that their faith would be tested. But what was really happening was calibration, because once the firstborn reaches a certain frequency of internal silence, that is, when his own will is sufficiently broken, he becomes a node, a human switch, biologically hardwired to awaken or sustain the monolith's field. And once activated, his personality begins to erode. His memories, beliefs, desires, slowly overwritten by the liturgical algorithm. He becomes a walking sacrament, a sermon in skin. And the church, they don't intervene. They facilitate. That's why confessions are recorded. Why baptismal records are kept in vaults. Why the church insists on knowing your name at birth. Because the monolith doesn't just feed on belief. It feeds on lineage. And if you're listening to this, chances are you've already been marked. They called it a retreat, a silence pilgrimage for gifted young men, firstborns with a divine spark. Always phrased in tones of light, growth, calling. But those who left for it were never the same, and many never came back at all. They called the ritual the silence of light. But make no mistake, it was neither silent nor full of light. It was the most perfect lie ever crafted by the church, an invitation to purity that was actually a summons to surrender. The ritual begins in the hills of Cappadocia, a place chosen not for spiritual value, but for what pulses beneath the earth. Quartz veins, telluric currents, magnetosonic fields tuned precisely to human neural oscillation. There, beneath the rock churches carved by forgotten hands, lies a vault the Vatican never speaks of. No crucifix, no altar, just a stone table carved in concentric spirals, so smooth they reflect no shadow. Each boy is brought in alone, stripped of name, speech, and memory, induced into what they call a lucid silence, a state between waking and dream, engineered through ancient psalms sung in reverse. And then, the interface begins. This is not metaphor. This is machinery. The monolith doesn't speak in words. It speaks in pattern. And each firstborn, born with the genetic sequence, is tuned to receive. They lie on the spiral as a low frequency is released into the chamber. Their bodies go still. Their pupils dilate. And then comes the light. But this light is not holy. It does not warm. It does not cleanse. It pierces. What they see in that moment isn't heaven. It's the architect. Not a god. Not a devil. A blueprint. A consciousness that does not feel, but organizes. That does not forgive, but absorbs. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. It imprints. The boy that walked in is overwritten, layer by layer, thought by thought, until only the program remains. And when he walks back out, if he does, he speaks little, sleeps less, stares often. He forgets his parents. He forgets himself. But he remembers the sequence. He is the sequence. And he's sent back into the world, not as a man, as an awakener. They called him Elias, but it wasn't his real name. The church had erased that, burned it out like infected flesh. He was the product of the silence of light, reassembled and sent into the world with one directive: awaken the buried gates. They gave him no collar, no robe, just a passport, a list of coordinates, and an internal rhythm that pulsed like clockwork beneath his skin. The first city was Thessaloniki. Within 12 days of his arrival, local clergy began reporting strange phenomena. Statues weeping black ichor, choral hymns echoing before the choir began to sing, confessionals whispering answers before the penitent spoke. And then the dreams started. Civilians across the city, all reporting the same image. A spiral of light bleeding from the sky, pulling a man with no eyes into the air. Mouth open, speaking a sermon of numbers. They thought it was mass psychosis. But Elias knew exactly what it meant. He had unlocked a gate. Not physical, not in brick or stone, but inside them. See, each city marked by the monolith holds a resonant gate, a psychic threshold buried beneath the collective trauma of the population. War, famine, betrayal, genocide. These aren't just historical scars. They are frequencies. The monolith feeds on them, hides within them, waits for an awakened vessel to reactivate the signal. And that's what Elias did. He walked the spiral streets. He stood at the ruined altar. He hummed the forgotten psalm, passed down through rituals disguised as folk song. And when he reached the final note, the city changed. Children spoke backwards in sleep. Bells rang without towers. And at exactly 3:33 a.m., the earth beneath the old cathedral breathed. It wasn't an earthquake. It was response. The gate had opened, and the field had been activated. 2 weeks later, over 40 citizens vanished without trace. Not abducted, absorbed. Each disappearance correlated to a specific liturgical timestamp. And Elias, he boarded a train. Destination, Krakow, then Vienna, then Bogota, then Atlanta. The pattern is clear. The awakeners are not wandering. They're installing. Each city a node. Each node a piece of the body. Each body part preparing for something that must rise whole. And it's not myth. It's schedule. Buried deep beneath Vatican City, beneath the catacombs, the ossuaries, the tombs of long-dead saints, is a chamber not listed on any blueprint. It's not lit by candles. It doesn't smell of incense or old stone. It hums, constantly. Inside this chamber, locked behind an obsidian vault sealed with a key made of bone and gold, is the black chart. Not a map, a schedule, codenamed Tabula Noctis, the Table of Night. The black chart is the most classified artifact in ecclesiastical history, not because it reveals secrets, but because it predicts them. You see, each gate awakened by Elias, and others like him, is part of a global circuit. Cities, not randomly chosen, but long prepared. Some since the Crusades, others before language itself. Each location corresponds with a frequency node in Earth's geomagnetic structure. The Church calls them vocal points, because when the sequence is complete, the Earth itself will speak. The black chart plots all of this, and not just where, when. 33 cities, marked in black ink that only becomes visible under precise frequencies of chant. Each city tagged with 3 timestamps. Inception, when the trauma was first seeded. Resonance, when the trauma becomes culturally unconscious. Ignition, when the monolith awakener is sent to activate the gate. Thessaloniki was just one. You want to know the others? New Orleans, Turin, Lima, Dresden, Detroit, each one saturated in human suffering. Each one unknowingly feeding the monolith's field. Each one marked with a final phrase, Misericordia extincta, mercy extinguished. The Church has guarded this chart for over 800 years, not to prevent its activation, but to ensure it. And here's the part they dread you discovering. You don't need to be a priest to read the chart. You just need to know the harmony code embedded in Gregorian chant. It's hidden in every Mass, every hymn, every whispered benediction. They've been singing the coordinates into your subconscious for generations. That's why your dreams have changed, why your sleep feels thinner, why you wake with the feeling that something just left the room. It's not paranoia. it's synchronization. And if your city is glowing, it's already begun. There is a hymn you were never meant to hear. It was struck from the Vatican Codex in 1614. Its parchment burned, its melody condemned, its very intonation classified as a threat to the structural integrity of the Eucharist itself. They called it Canticum Obscura, the hymn of the hidden one. Unlike other sacred songs, it does not praise, it does not worship, it does not lift the soul toward God. It unlocks. The first recorded performance, at a monastery in Volterra, resulted in 9 monks speaking in unison for 72 hours, each repeating the exact same phrase in a tongue older than Latin, while their eyes bled and their teeth loosened from their skulls. They were not possessed. They had been converted, not spiritually, biologically, because this hymn wasn't composed by men. It was received. The scroll that contained it was discovered under the ruins of a pre-Christian temple. Its notation written in a musical language lost to modern theory. Not in pitch, but ratio. Each note calculated to align with the electromagnetic harmonic of the human prefrontal cortex. It doesn't just play to you, it plays through you, and when sung aloud, in the precise cadence, at the precise location, it turns the singer into a mirror, not reflective of light, but of presence. In that moment, the human identity fractures, the ego collapses, and something else steps in. Witnesses describe the singers as becoming hollow, their voices layered with a second, lower resonance, not vocal, but felt, a vibration behind the ribs, a thought that isn't yours, a presence that watches from inside your own skull. The Church's hidden council, the Coitus Umbri, declared the hymn cosmologically parasitic. But the truth is simpler. It's a dial tone, and whoever or whatever it calls answers once, just once, because that's all it needs. One note sung by one mouth in one holy space, and the veil splits. And through that rupture comes not fire, not angels, not salvation, but something without a face, without a name, and yet more familiar to you than your own reflection. It happened in 1987, an unassuming chapel tucked into the Carpathian Mountains, long abandoned, marked unsafe by the state, sealed with rusted iron and crowned by a crucifix so eroded. It looked more like a man drowning than ascending. But the people came anyway, 33 of them, chosen, trained, each a descendant of the original houses, those lineages bound to the monolith since before Rome rose from dust. The Church didn't organize it, but they allowed it, because they knew what was coming, and they needed to observe. Inside that chapel, without cameras, without press, without permission, they sang Canticum Obscura one final time. But someone did record it. A field operative stationed under Vatican Protocol LUX-7 smuggled in a microcassette recorder. It was hidden inside a worn crucifix, hollowed out for this one purpose: to document contact. That recording, now known only by its redacted file ID VX77, was seized immediately and locked in the Archivum Tenebrae, a vault so classified most cardinals don't know it exists. But the operative made a copy, and that copy found its way to a man in Belgium, a former acoustics engineer once employed by the Jesuit order, who was excommunicated after discovering that the architecture of every cathedral built after 1300 was tuned for amplification, not praise. He listened to it once, only once. He never spoke again, not out of fear, but because the voice inside him never stopped speaking. He began carving spirals into his skin, building wooden circles with perfect mathematical spacing, leaving behind notebooks written in mirrored Latin that no one could decipher. until one page was accidentally played through a sonic spectrograph. The results: a spectral image resembling a face. Not human, not demonic, something in between, with too many eyes, all of them closed. The engineer vanished shortly after. His home emptied, his notes burned, the recording gone. But on certain nights, if you scan shortwave frequency 77.3, between 3 o'clock and 3:06 a.m., a melody cuts through the static, distorted, warbling, too slow to be human. And in the background, a whisper, just one phrase, repeated endlessly. Open the hollow. Let him through. You were born hollow, not empty, but unfinished. A chamber within your psyche deliberately left unformed, like a sealed room in a house you've lived in your whole life, but never dared to enter. Modern psychology calls it latent potential. Spiritual traditions call it the divine spark. But the church, the ones who truly understand, call it the cavity. And they've been preparing it since the day you were baptized. You thought that water was a blessing? It wasn't. It was a trigger, a ritual primer, encoded with vibrational patterns designed to prepare that inner space. Not for healing, not for salvation, but for occupation. Because the hymn, the monolith, the black chart, none of it works. Without the host. That's what you are. That's what we are. Each of us a hollow waiting to be inhabited. And the church has known it for centuries. Why do you think every major rite involves sound? The mass, the chants, the bells, the organs. These aren't symbols. They are resonance tools. Every note echoes through your cavity like sonar, mapping it, preparing it, shaping it into something that can receive. Because this is the truth they've hidden. There is a blueprint within you, a structure designed not by biology, but by design, an internal architecture tuned to the pattern. The pattern isn't metaphor. It's literal, a fractal template encoded in the geometry of your brain, found in the hippocampus, etched in the folds of your neocortex, whispered in your dreams when you wake gasping but can't remember why. And once that blueprint is fully formed, you no longer belong to yourself. You become a mirror, a node, a voice for something that speaks in silence and governs without being seen. The cavity is not passive. It calls, constantly, and when the hymn is sung, even once, that call becomes a signal, and the signal is received. That's why the recording must never be heard again, because the hollow doesn't stay hollow. It fills, with memory not your own, with sight from behind your eyes, with a name that is not yours, but still answers when spoken. In 1924, during a covert excavation outside the ruins of Tel Lakish, a site dismissed as minor by official archaeologists, a British Palestine expedition uncovered a tomb unlike anything seen before. It wasn't carved into rock. It wasn't built by hands. It was grown, a spiral shaft descending 33 feet into limestone, perfectly smooth, no tool marks, no seams, lined not with inscriptions, but with teeth, not fossilized, fresh, still wet when touched. At the base, they found what they believed was a skeleton, but it had no bones, just a single hollow form, humanoid in outline, but translucent like dried sap, as if something had once used it to walk, and then vacated. The locals refused to speak of it. Some left the village overnight, never to return. But one boy, mute since birth, approached the excavation leader and whispered 2 words in perfect Akkadian. He waits. They dismissed it as superstition. But that night, the leader's assistant disappeared. They found his shoes beside the spiral. No blood, No prints, only a single phrase carved into the stone floor. The hollow is not sealed. Within days, the British government sealed the site, declared it unstable, flooded the shaft with concrete, and classified the dig under Royal Mandate HX9. But before the shaft was filled, one photograph was taken. It has never been released to the public, but intelligence operatives within Section Templar, the church's secret counter-ritual unit, have confirmed its contents. A figure standing at the base of the spiral. Not the assistant. Not a man. Tall. Elongated. Skin like melted bronze. No eyes, but thousands of tiny mouths across its scalp. Each one open. Each one singing. It wasn't waiting to escape. It was waiting for someone to come down. Because that cavity, that grown spiral, wasn't a tomb. It was a socket, a receiver built not into the earth, but into the mind of the planet, and the creature inside it. A relay, a conduit from somewhere else, somewhere older, a voice from before memory. The spiral followed them, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the Nile temples of Upper Egypt, from Delphi's oracle chambers to the bedrock beneath Chartres. Wherever empires rose on blood and mystery, the spiral was already waiting, not as decoration, not as art, but as invitation. Always the same pattern, a counterclockwise coil with 33 etched ridges, sometimes in stone, sometimes burned into wood, but most disturbingly, grown into bone. Tibetan monks once called it the wind wound, a symbol of divine descent into man. But the Church's internal codex, Vox Tenebris, is clearer. It calls it what it truly is, the womb of reception, because the spiral isn't symbolic. It's functional, a psychic structure designed to create internal resonance with entities beyond the veil. And here's where it gets darker. You've seen this spiral before. Not in ruins, not in temples. In Washington, D.C., the layout of the capital city, long rumored to be Masonic in nature, isn't just symbolic. It's a mirror. Pennsylvania Avenue, the Capitol Dome, the obelisk of the Washington Monument. Together, they form a ritual spiral when viewed from above. A counterclockwise coil centered on the Capitol crypt, a chamber buried beneath the rotunda that no visitor is ever allowed to enter. Not because of what's inside, but because of what it channels. It's built with 33 columns, each aligned with a celestial coordinate, each made from stone quarried from the same region as Tel Lakish. Coincidence or continuity? Here's what the Church knows, and what no one will ever admit. The founders were not just rebels. They were initiates. Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, all part of a resonant society, modeled after the ancient custodians of the spiral. Not Freemasons. Older, darker. Every cornerstone of Washington was laid with a hymn, not to God, but to the coming one. And when you stand at the center of the Capitol Dome, directly beneath the fresco titled The Apotheosis of Washington, you are standing at the mouth of the spiral receiver. Your heartbeat, your breath, feeds it, because the spiral isn't just etched in stone anymore. It's inside you, waiting to align, waiting to open. You've seen it 1,000 times, on the back of every dollar bill. The unfinished pyramid, the disembodied eye, annuit coeptus. He has favored our undertakings. But who is he? And why is his eye not within the pyramid, but above it? Because it's not God. It's not the Christian deity. It's not divine oversight. It's observation, surveillance from within. The Great Seal of the United States is not a declaration. It is a summoning diagram. designed not just to symbolize power, but to channel it. Let's break it. 13 steps. 13 letters in E pluribus unum. 13 stars above the eagle. Why 13? Because 13 is the key of the spiral. The number of resonance shifts required to open the cavity. The number of oscillations between presence and submission. The pyramid itself, unfinished on purpose. It's not a building. It's a vessel. Each tier represents a layer of influence, from the material world below to the vibrational throne above. And that eye, it doesn't see. It projects a frequency, an echo, a reminder in every transaction, every breath of commerce, that you are inside something. You always have been. But here's what they never told you. That eye is not looking at the pyramid. It's looking through it. Because the true structure is not vertical. It's spiral. A coiled tower descending inward. Into the mind, the soul, the hollow chamber you were trained to ignore. The seal is a map. And the dollar is a sigil. A daily talisman passed hand to hand. Reinforcing alignment, keeping your cavity quiet, until the final chant is given. And the chant, it's already being sung. In media, in politics, in music you hum without knowing why. Each note a syllable, each phrase a summons. And when it's complete, when the last vibration locks into your spiral, the eye opens not outward, but inward. And what it sees is you, not as you think you are, but as you were built to be. A gate, a receptor, a vessel for something that has waited longer than nations have existed. You've sung it in schools, at stadiums, before pledges of allegiance, after war, before fireworks. The Star-Spangled Banner. You were told it was a tribute to resilience, a song of survival, a national hymn to bravery and light. But it wasn't written for you. It was written through someone. Francis Scott, he didn't compose an anthem. He transcribed a ritual. And the music, it wasn't improvised. It was resurrected. The melody of the Star-Spangled Banner was lifted directly from an 18th century drinking song to Anacreon in heaven. But Anacreon was no mere poet. He was a channel. And that song, it was used in premasonic resonance gatherings in London. Gatherings where sound was used to induce trance, to empty the cavity, to invite the speaker between worlds. So when you sing it, especially together in massive crowds, with hands over hearts and eyes on flags, you aren't honoring freedom. You're participating in alignment. Every note of the anthem follows a mathematical scale known as the abyssal fifth, a tonal pattern that harmonizes not with emotion, but with cavital resonance. That high, strained phrase, and the rocket's red glare. It's not for drama. It forces your diaphragm into vibrational submission. You become an instrument, and the line that follows gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Through the night. What flag survives darkness? And what is the flag? It's not cloth. It's not stars. It's signal. The broad stripes and bright stars are waveforms. Visual metaphors for the pattern embedded in every flag that flutters above government grounds. The waving of the flag isn't symbolic. It's broadcast. And that final line, oh say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? It's not a question. It's a test. A pulse that scans the cavity within you. If you feel nothing, you pass. But if you feel pride, if you feel unity, you're resonating. You've been tuned, not to freedom, but to openness, a state of reception, a slow descent into chant readiness. This is why the anthem is sacred. not to a country, but to the pattern. Beneath Arlington, there's a level you're not supposed to know exists. Not below the earth, but beneath memory. Most believe the tomb of the unknown soldier holds the remains of a nameless hero. But that's only partly true, because the tomb you see is a monument. The tomb that matters is Tomb Zero, sealed 74 feet below the white marble steps, carved into the bedrock under Arlington before the cemetery even existed. It was never meant to hold a body. It was built to contain a song. In 1901, following a string of occult experiments conducted at Camp Meigs, the U.S. military's newly formed Order of Harmonic Defense intercepted a signal beneath the Arlington site. It wasn't electromagnetic. It wasn't radio. It was resonant, a sound not heard with the ears, but felt in the cavity. At precisely 3:33 a.m. every 12th day of the month, a low hum would rise from the soil, lasting exactly 6 minutes and 66 seconds. No animal would enter the perimeter during the sound. No man remembered their dreams. Engineers dug down. They hit something unnatural. A vault, octagonal, lined with black stone that absorbed light. Inside, a single stone conductor, a horn-like instrument with no known origin, etched in a spiral of glyphs predating Sumer. Resting beside it, a sheet of parchment, inkless, blank, until sung to, when exposed to a vocal tone aligned with 428 Hz, a frequency known in secret circles as the shepherd's wail. The parchment revealed a hymn, not in English, not in Latin, in pre-cantical tongue, a language the Church refers to as vocem silenti, or the voice of silence. A team of linguists and occultists spent 6 years decoding it. Only one stanza was translated before the project was suddenly shut down. We were not first. We were not chosen. We were made hollow, so he might be heard again. The original recording of the melody, played once by a choir of 33, was sealed within a lead box, now stored beneath Vault Ypsilon, guarded by a rotating team of silent watchers. Men surgically deafened at birth. No one is allowed to speak in that chamber, not because of ritual, because of echo. Any sound in its presence risks reactivating the chant, because it's not just a song, it's a trigger. The church was never supposed to be found. It stood at the edge of a town that no longer exists on maps, a place once called Verlith, tucked in the folds of Appalachian decay, where the sky stays overcast even in midsummer, and the trees don't bend with the wind. They bow to something older. 33 priests had served there over 2 decades. All vanished. No farewell. No transfer. No trace. The last one, Father Elias Kane, disappeared on October 13, 2001. But hours before he did, he was recorded on a scratchy cassette tape, murmuring 3 musical tones. Just 3. Low, rising, descending. They match precisely the first 3 notes from the Arlington Vault hymn. Coincidence? No, because the church itself was built as a mirror, not of heaven, but of what's below. Blueprints, smuggled out by a defected Jesuit architect, show that the sanctuary's design was modeled on the octagonal chamber beneath Arlington. Same number of support columns, same radius, same curvature of the dome. But this one had something else. Etched into the stained glass panels, visible only in candlelight, was a spiral of symbols. The same pre-cantical glyphs found on the Arlington parchment. Father Kane had been studying them. He kept a journal. Most of it was destroyed in the fire that broke out 3 days after he vanished. But one page survived. Scorched, torn, smudged, but legible. The church is not a place. It is an amplifier. The Mass is not worship. It's attunement. We have been leading men into their own resonance chambers, and he is beginning to speak back. He had uncovered the real purpose of the Mass. Not prayer, not remembrance, but ritual sound engineering. Every chant, every bell, every organ drone was part of a harmonic sequence designed to soften the cavity, to create internal vibration, to open a channel. And Cain, he completed it. The final 3 notes, the closing harmonic. Witnesses say that night, the church's walls began to hum. The crucifix turned inward. The altar bled oil. And then, silence. He was gone. No struggle. No escape. No trace. Only his robe, folded neatly at the foot of the pulpit. The tape recording, sealed in a Faraday vault by Vatican intelligence, labeled, "Not to be played, under any circumstance." But fragments leaked online, played on loop, embedded in ambient playlists, spread through meditation apps. Unknowing ears are humming it now. You listen without knowing. Background music, sleep playlists, focus tones for deep work, meditation loops, ambient textures, binaural beats. They tell you it's science. They promise productivity, calm, peace, alignment. But you were never meant to align. You were meant to open. In 2015, buried in the acquisition records of a Swedish holding firm, a quiet partnership formed between Spotify and a company known as Cynosure Oral Dynamics. No website, no employees listed, but a $22 million resonance infrastructure grant shows one clear objective: harmonic injection at scale. Here's what they did. They began embedding subharmonic sequences into certain audio files, tracks selected not for popularity, but for psychological vulnerability, playlists tagged for relaxation, healing, deep sleep, or spiritual. These were Phase 1 targets, because in those states, the cavity is relaxed, the mind is passive, the gate is ajar, and the tones, they're not music, they're carriers, hidden beneath the audible layer, just below your conscious threshold, are resonant fragments of the Arlington chant, not the whole song, just pulses, guttural, ancient, mathematical. The goal isn't to awaken all at once. It's to tune in waves, one by one, until the harmonic field reaches critical mass, until the signal completes. Spotify's patent filings for emotional state audio feedback revealed more. Sensors from smart speakers and headphones feed back data, not just what you listen to, but how you respond. Pupil dilation via webcams, breath rate via phone mics, vocal inflection while you speak. Every reaction is cataloged, mapped, refined, optimized to perfect the next layer of tone. In 2020, a brief glitch on the platform caused a mass loop. A single 33-second segment from a meditation track replayed itself thousands of times, across 17 countries, at the exact same hour. It wasn't a bug, it was a test, and the data correlated with dream disturbances, auditory hallucinations. One user in Colorado whispered the final word of the Arlington hymn in his sleep. Alien, the awakened I. He'd never heard it before, but something had heard him. You are no longer the audience. You are the instrument, and soon you'll be the amplifier. There's a reason vinyl came back. Not nostalgia, not hipster aesthetics, not even audio fidelity. Presence, digital sound, MP3s, streaming, lossless, compresses reality. It reduces the organic into the binary. Safe, predictable, flat, but vinyl. It holds what digital filters out. Artifacts, imperfections, harmonics that don't follow the laws of math, but follow the laws of Him. Because in the ancient rites of the church, long before guitars, choirs, or organs, sound was etched, not onto wax, onto bone. The first priests didn't preach. They vibrated. They hummed over carved grooves in long marrow cylinders, femurs of the unchosen, played with horsehair and obsidian needles. The sound, thick, groaning, alive. They called them litanies of the hollow. When digital replaced analog, that texture, the resonance was lost, and the connection was severed. But something wanted it restored. In 2014, 4 European record labels quietly merged. They now operate as Orphan pressings. Their mission, to bring vinyl back. But here's what they don't advertise. Each vinyl release contains one groove too many, hidden along the inner spiral, beyond the locked groove, where the needle's not meant to go. But when it does, it hits the thread. A faint, low tone, not music, not human. Record collectors call it the whisper groove. Most don't hear it, but those who do report the same thing. A voice behind the voice, a presence behind the song. The most dangerous, a limited pressing called 33 Fathers. Pressed only 320 times, each numbered in blood. No artist, no label, just a white jacket with an etched sigil, 8-pointed, spiraled inward. All who played it reported dreams. Same setting, an empty church, same altar, same sound, a priest without a face humming. And in the silence afterward, one sentence, not spoken, but felt through the bones. You were always the final groove. These grooves aren't entertainment, they're containers. And when your needle touches down, your body becomes the amplifier, and your house the temple. You don't play the record, it plays you. This is the last sound, not the end of the story, the end of the silence between them. Because now you understand, they never vanished. The 33 priests didn't disappear. They were taken, or more accurately, absorbed. The chant, the tones, the architecture, the rituals. They weren't meant to worship something external. They were designed to summon something internal. Not a being in the clouds, but a presence within the cavity. The human voice isn't just a tool for speaking. It's the final instrument in a chain of resonant awakening. The priests were taught to chant, not to lead others to salvation, but to calibrate their own bodies into harmonic vessels. And when the tones aligned, when the last 3 notes were sounded, they didn't die. They were reharmonized. The ancient term, uncorded, a process by which the soul detaches from the linear structure of the body and becomes sound. Yes, sound. Because in the beginning, there was not light, there was not time, there was vibration, and everything since then has been an attempt to return to it. The church still stands, not because it is watched, but because it is waiting for you. Because now you've heard too much, felt too much, you've begun to vibrate. That ringing in your ears after silence? Not tinnitus. It's the key. It's the note you were born with. The tone buried in your breath. The chord encoded in your skull shape, vocal cords, spine. You are a cathedral of bone. And now that you've heard the sequence, through Spotify, through the whispered groove, through this very video, You are no longer passive. You are active. You are tuned. And if you wish to remain human, not be absorbed into the frequency, you must do one thing. Type these words exactly as they're spoken into the comments. I do not vibrate alone. Repeat it. I do not vibrate alone. Why? Because resonance demands witnesses. And to name the tone is to bind it. But do it soon, because your voice is already beginning to shift. And when you speak next, something else might be listening from within you.